Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Sip and Talk. I'm Joe, and as always, I've got Sunny here with me.
You bring the info, we wrestle it to the ground and pull out the really interesting stuff for you.
Yeah, get right into the thick of it.
Exactly. And today we've got something, well, pretty pointed. It's a propaganda video.
From where?
Straight from the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs, dropped April 29th, 2025. And the title, Never Kneel Down.
Wow. Okay. Never kneel down. That's not subtle. And the timing, that was right around the U.S. tariff hikes, wasn't it?
Spot on. Then President Trump had just announced those huge increases, up to 145% on some Chinese imports.
Ouch.
Yeah. So this video is clearly Beijing's pushback. Their message is, we won't submit to American, quote, hegemonism and economic coercion.
It was bilingual, right?
Yeah.
Chinese and English.
Yep.
And using AI visuals.
Yep. Pulled out all the stops. AI visuals, too. Which makes you wonder, who exactly is the main audience here?
Good question. Something we should definitely dig into.
That's the plan. We want to unpack the arguments in the video itself. But then there's this other angle, maybe a bit ironic. How do those same arguments stack up against China's own actions? Especially thinking about, say, Taiwan or smaller nations in Southeast Asia.
Ah, right. The potential double standard if you're calling out the bully.
You need to make sure you're not doing the same thing. Yeah. And we'll also touch on that whole gang boss analogy people sometimes use.
Okay, interesting. So where do we start with the video's arguments? What's the core message?
Well, they kick off with this metaphor, the typhoon eye.
The calm sinner.
Exactly. They paint any U.S. tariff relief, like a short pause, as just a trap.
A trap? How so?
The video suggests it's a tactic to isolate China, to pressure other countries into limiting trade with them. Like, see, it's calm now, come away from China. It's presented as deceptive.
Okay, so a pretty suspicious view of any U.S. move.
Yeah.
And they'll probably bring up history to support that.
Oh, yeah. They definitely lean on historical examples.
Like what?
They point to Japan, specifically companies like Toshiba back in the day, claiming the U.S. used anti-dumping measures to suppress them. And they bring up the Plaza Accord, 1985. The video framed it as the U.S. forcing currency changes that led to Japan's, long economic stagnation.
So the message is, don't trust U.S. economic agreements, they'll hurt you. Got it. What else?
They also use the Alstom case, the big French industrial company.
Oh, right. I remember hearing about that.
The video argues the U.S. used its long-arm jurisdiction, applying U.S. laws outside the U.S. to essentially dismantle Alstom.
Wow. Dismantle it.
Yeah, break it up, take key parts. The conclusion they draw is stark. Yielding to a hegemon, meaning the U.S., is like drinking poison. Fatal.
Yikes. Strong words. And then there's the Meng Wanzhou case, right? That must feature prominently.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Her arrest in Canada, the U.S. request over Iran sanctions, her eventual return, it's presented as a huge symbol.
A symbol of China not backing down.
Exactly. Standing firm, defiance, even under pressure, like her house arrest. She became this national icon of resistance.
Okay, so historical warnings, a recent symbol of defiance. What's the actual stance they declare?
Very firm language. Things like, China does not kneel, China does not retreat.
No compromise.
Pretty much. They state this belief. Cooperation through struggle leads to survival. Cooperation through compromise leads to demise. It's all about standing your ground.
Doesn't leave much room for negotiation, does it?
Not really. And they also try to diminish the U.S.'s global standing a bit.
How? By pointing out trade figures.
Yeah. They highlight that U.S. trade, while big, is less than a fifth of the global total.
The U.S. isn't the whole world argument.
Precisely. Implying the U.S. can't dictate terms to everyone and maybe isn't as central as it thinks.
So where does this all lead? A call for global unity against the U.S.?
Essentially, yes. The video positions China as the leader of this resistance.
Leader? What kind of language do they use?
Pretty lofty stuff. Raising the torch, cutting through the mist, leading nations to stand tall, even portraying China as the voice for weak nations, defending world justice.
So China as the champion against hegemony.
That's the image. And to really hammer it home, they even weave in some classic Maoist rhetoric.
Oh, really? Like
phrases like, all reactionaries are paper tigers. It connects the current trade fight to, historical anti-U.S. sentiment. It really aims to stir up nationalism.
Okay, powerful stuff, especially for a domestic audience. So that's the video's narrative. U.S. bad, China defiant leader.
Pretty much sums it up, but now.
Let's pivot. Let's talk about the potential irony.
Right. Can China's own actions be seen through the same lens it uses to criticize the U.S.?
Exactly. Let's start with Taiwan. China objects to U.S. coercion, but what about its own approach there?
Well, yeah. The constant military exercises near Taiwan, PLA jets crossing the median line. It's hard not to see that as pressure.
Pressure to accept Beijing's one China principle, right?
It certainly looks that way. And didn't the Taiwan Affairs Office criticize the DPP government in April 25?
They did, accuse them of seeking independence by relying on the U.S., which sounds a bit like the video's complaint about others aligning with a hegemon.
Mm-hmm.
And there were those tighter residence permit rules for Taiwanese, too. Another form of pressure, perhaps.
It seems like it. So China's telling others, don't bow to the hegemon while putting significant pressure on Taiwan. It feels, well, inconsistent.
Yeah, the word contradictory comes to mind.
Okay, let's widen the lens. Southeast Asia, the South China Sea.
Ah, another complex area. China's actions there, building artificial islands, militarizing them.
And the Coast Guard actions against Vietnamese and Filipino boats.
Exactly. That incident in April 25, the Chinese Coast Guard boarding a Philippine-controlled feature at Iroquois Reef.
Right. How does that look to smaller neighbors?
For them, it likely feels like a much larger power asserting dominance, maybe ignoring their rights. It kind of mirrors the video's complaint about U.S. long-arm jurisdiction, but it's China projecting power regionally.
That do as I say, not as I do vibe again. And it's not just military stuff, is it? There's economic pressure, too.
Oh, definitely. China's certainly used economic leverage before. Remember the tariffs on Australian wine?
Yeah, 2020 to 2023.
Or the restrictions on South Korean entertainment after they deployed the THAAD missile system.
Which, let's be honest, sounds a lot like the U.S. tariff policies the never kneel down video is railing against.
The parallel is pretty striking, isn't it? It highlights that tension, powerful nations advocating principles they don't always apply to themselves.
So the video says, don't kneel, don't compromise with bullies, but China's actions towards smaller neighbors.
It can put those smaller nations in a really tough spot.
Mm.
They might feel compelled to yield, maybe due to economic reliance on China, even if they disagree. Look at how careful many Southeast Asian nations are about criticizing China over the South China Sea.
Because they can't afford to alienate Beijing.
Often, yeah. So that message of don't compromise gets complicated when China holds significant economic power over you.
And think back to Meng Wanzhou, the video's symbol of not yielding. How does that square with, say, the detention of the two Michaels in China?
That's a really sharp contrast. The video praises Meng's resilience against what it calls U.S. pressure. But the detention of Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor right after Meng's arrest, many saw that as direct retaliation.
Hostage diplomacy was the term used a lot.
Exactly. It looks like applying pressure yourself, which sits awkwardly next to condemning others for doing the same.
So, praising resistance on one hand, applying pressure on the other. Which brings us to this gang boss analogy. How might that feel from Taiwan's perspective?
Well, looking at the military intimidation, the diplomatic isolation efforts, the economic levers, you can see why Taiwan might feel like it's dealing with a much larger entity trying to force compliance, like a boss laying down the law.
Those PLA exercises in April 25 around the island, the propaganda, it fits that picture of pressure.
Definitely. Taiwan constantly asserts its independent status, while Beijing uses all these tools to push its one China agenda. It feels like an attempt to dictate terms.
And for Southeast Asian nations, the Philippines, Vietnam, how does the analogy resonate there?
Think about the South China Sea incidents. Chinese Coast Guard ships driving away or confronting Filipino or Vietnamese vessels. The Scarborough Shoal incident in April 25.
Displays of power.
Yeah, asserting control through presence and sometimes force. Then there's the economic side, like the Belt and Road Initiative.
Which offers development funds, but
also raises concerns about debt, the debt trap diplomacy argument, where countries end up owing China so much they have to make concessions, like Sri Lanka leasing Hambantota Port.
Right, for 99 years. So the gang boss idea may be crude, but it captures that feeling of power imbalance and potential coercion.
It points to a dynamic, yeah.
Which leads to the big question. If the video says never kneel down to the U.S., should smaller nations, should they kneel to China?
Logically, if you follow the video's own argument, the answer has to be no. Right?
Yeah.
If kneeling to a hegemon is bad, it's bad regardless of which hegemon it is.
And we do see resistance, don't we?
Absolutely. Look at the Philippines strengthening ties with the U.S. and Japan. Or Taiwan building relationships with other democracies, boosting its own defenses.
It's almost like they're applying the video's other message. Seeking cooperation through struggle, standing firm.
Precisely. Resisting pressure, not just accepting a subordinate role, because a bigger power demands it.
Okay, so let's think about the video itself again. Who was it really for? And what are its limits?
Well, the primary audience, almost certainly domestic. It's great for boosting nationalism, rallying support, maybe distracting from economic hiccups like that PMI contraction or falling exports reported in April.
Makes sense. What about internationally?
Internationally, it's likely aimed at countries feeling bruised by U.S. policies, especially tariffs, trying to build an anti-U.S. or at least anti-hegemony coalition with China potentially at the head.
But does this kind of strong rhetoric actually work? Are there downsides?
Oh, for sure. It risks escalating tensions with the U.S. even further, maybe without solving the core economic problems. China still relies heavily on exports. Those 145% tariffs will bite.
And the credibility issue?
Huge. By ignoring its own assertive behavior towards neighbors, the video loses persuasive power internationally. People notice the contradiction.
Plus, wasn't there talk of China making private concessions? That tough talk, soft heart idea.
Yeah, zig means rag. If true, it's just the public message isn't the whole story. And then you have the ongoing criticisms of Belt and Road as a debt trap, which doesn't help the benevolent leader image.
So it's complicated, lots of layers, lots of potential contradictions.
Definitely. A nation strongly condemning hegemony while facing accusations of acting like one itself.
Okay, let's wrap this up. We've seen China's Never Kneel Down video making a powerful case against U.S. pressure, using history, nationalism, the works.
But when you hold that message up against China's own actions, especially regarding Taiwan and Southeast Asia,
significant ironies pop up. The very arguments about hegemony and coercion could arguably be applied back to China.
It's that core tension. Condemning behaviors that you yourself are accused of.
Exactly. So here's something for you, the listener, to chew on. What does all this mean for the real world? For relations in the Asia-Pacific, for the balance of power? When a nation says never kneel down, what does standing tall truly entail, especially for smaller countries caught between giants? Some food for thought.
Until next time on The Deep Dive.